Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at game number 5 of the 2024 World Chess Championship match taking place in Singapore. Now, the match has been very topsy-turvy. It feels as though the games which have been exciting have featured Gukesh with the white pieces and Ding with the black pieces. In game number 1, we had Liren winning with the French defense, and then in game number 3, Gukesh struck back with the white pieces in a Queen's Indian decline. So after the two other games, games 2 and 4 being drawn, we now have the third game with Gukesh having the white pieces, with all the games being decisive with the players having these colors. Let's jump right into the action. So Gukesh with the white pieces opens with the move e4, and now we get the move e6 from Ding, and this of course is the classic French defense once again. Now in game number 1, Ding played it. It was a very shaky game. I felt he was definitely out prepared, but he was able to turn around in the middle. But what also is abundantly clear is that the French defense is going to be Liren's main weapon in this match, as he did not play the move e5. So we get e6. Now we have d4 being played, and here we get the move d5 from Ding, and so far pretty normal, but we get a bit of a shocker here when Gukesh plays the move pawn takes pawn. Now back in May of 2024, there was this tournament held in Toronto, Canada, called the FIDE Candidates Tournament. Two players in particular were playing this exchange French / exchange Petrov. Those players, of course, were Jan Nepomniachtchi and yours truly, myself, Grandmaster Hikaru Nakamura. Now, a lot of people like me doing the third person act where I say Hikaru and I don't refer to myself in the first person. But for today's video, I'm going to try and do it the normal way. So we got pawn takes pawn being played, takes, we get knight f3, knight f6, and now you're probably also wondering why I say the Petrov and the French. The reason is because the starting position can occur out of either opening here. After e4, let's say black plays e5, knight f3, knight f6, takes, d6, knight f3. Now after knight takes e4, d3, knight f6, d4, d5, we've reached the exact same position. So here we get to this position after knight to f6, and now Gukesh plays bishop d3. We get c5, and now the move c3. Now this position was played twice in the candidates. The first game was between Nepo and Abasov. Now Nepo in that game, I believe, castled his king out of the center, and after c4, Abasov was able to get one of his very few draws with the black pieces in the match. However, when he later would play against Hikaru would play the move c3. Now, when I played c3, the reason is that when black goes c4 here, you want to put the bishop on c2 and keep the bishop on the scope diagonal. Now, the one thing that I forgot to mention as well is that when Nepo played against Abasov, that draw is in essence what cost Nepo the chance at making the World Championship match, because if he'd won that game and gotten a half point more, he would have played a tiebreaker against Gukesh. So back to the game. We get c4, bishop c2 being played here, and now we have the move bishop d6. Now this, of course, as I mentioned, is my game against Abasov, but here we get the move queen e2. Now one thing that's amazing is to look back in time and think about history, and also how difficult chess is at the top level, where there are very limited ideas. Now the reason I mention that is because in my game against Abasov, I castled, he castled, and then I played the move h3, and after knight c6, bishop g5, here Abasov played the move b5 and would go on to eventually lose the game. Now this was a very critical game for me, because with that win, I moved to a +1 score. I would win 2 more games in a row, get to +3. I wasn't able to beat Gukesh in the final round, but I was in the running to win the tournament. Now the reason it's so fascinating is because if Abasov had known the best line in this position and made a forced draw here, nobody would be talking about me as though I had a great tournament, I made a great run, and I came up just short playing for the World Championship. They would be saying, oh man, he doesn't deserve to be in the tournament, he's not that good, and everything else. But it's all risk reward. Now at the time, this was a new idea when I played this. However, a couple months after the candidates tournament, one of my trainers or seconds for the match, a player by the name of Nils Grandelius from Sweden, he played this in the Olympiad against Alexei Shirov from Latvia. Now in that game, Shirov, obviously having looked at the line, he actually played the move h6, bishop h4, and g5, and this leads directly to a forced draw after takes, knight h5, attacking the pawn on g3. We got king to h2, and now there's the move queen d6, hitting the pawn on g3. Here, knight e5 was played by Grandelius. We got takes, f6, pinning the knight. Now we had knight to a3, takes, knight to b5 here, attacking the queen. Rook takes rook, queen to h5, queen f6, takes, and this was just a repetition after check, and they repeated a few more times before agreeing to a draw. So Nowadays, because that idea is well known and it's simply a draw, Gukesh decides to go for the move queen e2. Now we get the move queen to e7 being played. Gukesh trades the queens, castles, and now we get rook e8. Now this position you might be thinking is very, very dry here because black is going to just manually castle a king. Symmetrical pawn structure. However, there is some inherent risk here for black at the start, and the reason I say there's some inherent risk is because there are multiple options on every move. Now yesterday a lot of people got angry at me when I said that I could have drawn the position that Gukesh had with black even if I just showed up, and the reason is because there were very limited options. There was not really a path to go wrong, but in this game, even though the position is equal here, after it takes in bishop g5, knight d7, and knight d2, you don't really know what you're playing for. You can play h6 here, for example. You can also play the move king to f8 or b5, but there are multiple options on every move, and with multiple options, the chances to make a mistake and go wrong are much higher. And so with today's game, I would say that if I were playing with black here, since people probably see the bar and aren't impressed with Gukesh's play, I would say that I don't think I could just draw this if I showed up, because there's so many options and it's not clear what the right path is. So we get the move h6 being played here by Ding. Gukesh plays bishop h4, and now we get the all-star move knight h5. Now you'll notice here that Ding has an hour 52 minutes, Gukesh is 137, so this is clearly the first moment where Ding is out of preparation, but it bodes very well because he's in an endgame, and it's a pretty dry position. So we get h6 bishop h4, and now we have the move knight h5 being played by Ding after a 9-minute think, and this is an all-star move here. Now one of the reasons this opening choice is perhaps not great from Gukesh is that if you look at the first couple of games where Gukesh had the white pieces, it felt as though Ding struggled in the dynamic positions where there were a lot of pieces on the board, a lot of play. But here in a simplified position, he plays the move knight to h5. Now we get rook to e1, and we have the move king f8 here played by Ding. Now the reason knight h5 is such an all-star move is that it stops white from bringing the bishop back to g3 without being captured. So if you go bishop g3 and we get takes here and b5, now black has the two b's, and black can even start to try and push some p on the queen side and maybe claim the advantage. So we get rook to e1. Ding plays king to f8, and now we get the move g4 being played here. Now this is a very aggressive move by Gukesh, and it is a move that is flat out wrong. Now one thing that I noticed at the time during the game 3 post-game interview or press conference, you could say, was that it felt to me that Gukesh was a little bit too optimistic about his position. He felt that it was a very smooth game from start to finish, whereas it clearly was not. Ding was actually a little bit better in the early middle game. And the reason that stood out to me is that I have always followed the Indian players very closely, but when I look back to the candidates, or just in general, the elite Indian juniors, one thing that has really stood out to me is that I feel that both Gukesh and Arjun are very, very cold and objective players. I don't mean literally cold as people, but they're very cold and calculating. They look at the objectiveness of the position. They don't just think, okay, I'm better, I have to be better here, or there's always something in the position where I can win the game. But I did feel that after game 3, Gukesh was much more like that. And I actually was going to add also that out of the 3 juniors, I feel that Prag, sometimes he is the one who's a little bit too optimistic. So what I think happened here is that Gukesh was feeling a little bit too comfortable or maybe too complacent, and he started overestimating his position when he played the move g4. Ding goes knight to f4, we get bishop g3, and now we have this great move knight b6 being played here. The one issue for black is that you do need to finish the development on the queen side, and after knight to b6 is played, now there's pressure on the pawn on g4. You have this bastion on f4, and as you can tell from the evaluation, white is actually in a little bit of trouble. So we get the move g5 here from Gukesh. Now Ding trades, and he goes bishop to d7 here. The one piece that's not in the game, it is the rook on a8, and Ding at long last wants to finish the development and bring the last boy to the party with something like rook e8 or rook c8. Here Gukesh plays the move knight g to f3, and this is a move that I'm actually not a big fan of. I would have preferred the move knight to f1, trying to bring the knight to e3 to pressure these pawns on d5 or c4. Instead we get knight f3. Ding plays rook to e8, and now we get this move knight to e5 being played by Gukesh. Now this move is completely fine, and in essence I felt that this was an attempt to offer a draw, because what should happen after takes is that Gukesh should trade the rooks here. We probably get takes, knight e2, king f1, takes, and now after something like bishop to a4, bishop b1, bishop c6, even material, same number of pawns on the board, should probably be a draw by repetition here. If you don't play bishop c2, black has knight to a4, forking the two juicers. So after knight to e5 and takes is played, I was ready to start the recap about 20 minutes ago and thinking, okay, it's going to be a draw, we're all happy, that's life, just a boring game. But we get a big shocker when here Gukesh takes on e5 with the pawn, and now it becomes abundantly clear that what has gone wrong for Gukesh is that he has wildly overestimated his position in the situation. Now this is a very serious blunder, because now after pawn takes bishop, we get to move knight to d3 here, forking the rook and the 2 pawns at the same time, and now we have the move bishop takes d3 being played. Now you're probably thinking, well, what's the big deal? If white moves the rook to b1, you lose the pawn on e5. Now you're down a juicer and in trouble. If you go rook to e3, you lose this one, so you have to take the knight. But the issue here is that even though black has double pawns, now this pawn can become a pass pawn and become extremely dangerous very, very quickly. Now what I think Gukesh missed here, and we'll obviously listen to the press conference a little bit later on, is that I suspect Gukesh thought he could play b3 here, stopping the knight from jumping to c4 a4. But after b3, black can play rook to c8, attacking the pawn on c3, and now we get rook c1 to guard the pawn. And now black pushes p with d4, white goes c4, and there's a brilliant move, knight to d5 here. Now you cannot take the knight on d5, because then you lose the rook and the game. And if you play, let's just say f3, now the knight jumps to c3, it's jumping to e2 or a2. These pawns are actually very, very solid here on d4 and d3, and white is in a lot of trouble here and will very likely go on to lose the game. Now this is what I think Gukesh missed. Maybe he missed something else, but I suspect that was what happened, is that he simply missed this idea. He's probably thought rook c8, rook c1, d4, c4, and he was simply better. Now this also speaks to being objective about the position, because frankly, if you can get this position, let's say bishop c6, and you can put this knight on d4, white should also never be worse here. Say we got some position like this, white can only be better. So I think that Gukesh is starting to lose a little bit of the objectivity, which he's going to need to regain as the match continues. And I think that it's a very important point to make. So after takes here, Gukesh plays move f3. Now at this point, I thought that Gukesh was very likely going to lose this game, because he is in all kinds of trouble here. Now when he plays f3, the move that I wanted here was this move knight to a4 here, attacking the pawns on b2 and c3 here. And after rook to b1 and f6 here, white is in a lot of trouble. Maybe you can still save the game with rook e1, because if you were to take on f6, I will sack the pawn and go rook to e2, creating the kebab. And after takes, let's say you go bishop f4. Now there's bishop to h3, and suddenly all of white's pieces here are paralyzed. You can't move the knight without losing this pawn. You can't move the bishop. Your king is stuck in this little corner, this box here, and black probably is winning the position. So I really wanted to see knight a4, but instead Ding goes for this move knight c4. Now I don't really dislike knight c4 from the general standpoint, because it keeps chances to win alive, and it's actually a top computer move, but it makes life a lot more difficult. And the reason for that, and this applies to a lot of chess games and positions, is that now after knight c4 takes, and this great move rook to e4, we have opposite color bishops on the board, and white has a very clear-cut plan to try and stop the passed pawn from going down the board. Whereas with knight a4, you never get the situation where it's structurally very close to being a draw, and white doesn't have what we like to call an immediate fortress. So we get knight c4 instead. We get takes, rook to e4, and now here Ding plays this move bishop to c6 after a 5-minute think. Now this move is a very serious mistake in my opinion. After this move is played, Ding really is going to have to play like a boss in order to create any winning chances. What he should have played here was this very nuanced move rook to c8. Now the reason you should have played this is that it guards the pawn, but more importantly, there's a very deep concept here, which is, let's say white goes rook d4, you got bishop e6, and white plays king to f1, or let's say king f2. The deep concept here is that now black can play the move rook to c5, and the point is that both the b5 and a5 squares are available for the rook. Say you go h4, there's rook a5, a3, rook b5, and now you will lose a pawn. If you play b4, there's a classic end peasant with pawn takes pawn, and black pushes p to win the game. So this idea of rook c5 here is actually very, very deadly, because both rook b5 and rook a5 are in play, and white has this huge issue with the queenside pawns. So this would have been very exciting. Actually, after rook to c8, rook d4, bishop e6, the only move to try and save the game here for white is to go bishop f2. And the reason is that now if you play rook c5, I have rook to d8, checking the king, and after king moves, I take the rook, and after the trade, now I bring the bishop back. Or even king f2, I guess, is good enough. And with opposite color b's and same number of pawns, white will set up the blockade of the pawns and draw the game. So bishop to f2, keeps the game alive. And after king g8, I think white can play bishop to e3, king h7, and now king f2. And the point is that effectively rook c5 still doesn't work, so the check, winning the rook. And so black won't be able to get rook c5. And if you really need to, at some point you go rook d6, and now both the c6 and c5 squares are covered, so black can never lift the rook to the queen side and go after the juicers on a2 and b2 here. So this would have been the way to try and proceed. Instead, Ding plays the move bishop c6, still a decent move, by the way, because white has to play the move rook d4 if you were to take the pawn. After rook to d8 here, it's spaghetti-o time. Black is pushing the pawn down the board, and you just simply lose the game. If you go rook d4, I trade, and then I push p with d2 d1. If you go king f2, same thing, d2 d1. And if you play bishop f4, d2 takes. I have a kebab on the second rank here with the rook on d2 hitting the juicers, pawn on f3 under attack as well, and it's all over but the crying. But after bishop c6, Gukesh correctly plays the move rook to d4. Now we get takes, king to f2 being played, and now we have the move bishop c6. Now this move came as a massive shock to me to see Ding play this move, because the move that he should have played was bishop to h5. And the reason he should have played this move is that if white tries to grab the pawn to even the material, now d2 wins once again as the bishop covers the queening square. Rook d4 queen, takes, and black is up a rook and winning the game. Instead, Ding plays the move bishop to c6, and this is simply a shocking draw offer out of nowhere. Now, I'm not going to be too critical of Ding because frankly they're playing without computers, so they don't know the objective evaluation, first of all. But then secondly, in this game, unlike the first two games where he's playing with the black pieces, he has been able to equalize and maybe even get the advantage with literally no major danger. In both games 1 and 3, there was danger that existed. Even though he won game 1, there was legitimate danger where he was down an hour on the clock very early. But in this game, he has been able to breeze through it and get to this point. Now, the reason that bishop to h5 keeps some chances alive is after king e3, b5, trying to guard the pawn, a4, a6 here. White has to play something like rook h4, g6, and rook d4, and at least here you remain up a pawn with the connect 4 and maybe some small chances at winning. Objectively, I think it still should be a draw, but the game goes on. Instead, we get the move bishop to c6, and now Gukesh plays the move rook takes c4 here. And after rook takes c4, now if black tries to push the p with d2, there's simply rook to d4. So after takes, we get the move rook to d8 being played here, and now Gukesh plays rook to d4, offering the trade of the rooks. And now at this point, it's abundantly clear that with rooks coming off the board and opposite color bishops, the game will be a draw. The game concludes shortly here. We get this move bishop to d5, attacking the pawn, b3, king e7, king to e3. Now we get king e6, takes, g6 is played here. Now you're probably thinking, wait, Gukesh is up a pawn here. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. But with opposite color bishops here, black's bishop is going to struggle to win white's pawns, and white's bishop cannot touch any of the black pawns or pieces for that matter. So we get king c3, a6 is played. Now you'll notice the king is glued to this square, guarding the bishop. Bishop will always guard the pawns, and now we get king to d3, king f5, king e3, king e6, king to d3, king f5, king e3, king e6, and now the players reach move number 40 and they agree to a draw here. Now the one last line that I want to show you guys, after a6, white could go king b4, but basically here I'm just going to always do the yo-yo forever. It doesn't matter what you do. Even if you keep pushing the p here, I just keep yo-yoing between d5, h1, g2, and f3. b5 takes, I keep yo-yoing. It doesn't really matter, just bishop h1, and eventually white will have to go a6, and there's really no play here because you can never dislodge the king or the pawns, and the game will end peacefully. So a little bit of a disappointing game from how abruptly it seemed to end when it felt like the game was just heating up. My general takeaways from this game are as follows. First off, I'm a little bit surprised by the opening choice from Gukesh in this game. It felt like it wasn't really in his spirit trying to play an endgame and grind. That's definitely something that the ghost of the 5-time world champion, also his birthday by the way, Magnus Carlsen, would love to play. But for Gukesh, I feel like he's more of a calculator. He likes these straightforward calculations versus trying to grind endgames. So it was a little bit of a peculiar choice in my opinion. He clearly didn't get what he wanted, and Ding was very well prepared. Obviously can't fault him. He tried to do something, but I'm just a little bit surprised he didn't have a better second idea in the French defense versus going into this queenless middle game. So a little bit of a bummer for Ding, or for Gukesh I should say. For Ding, obviously he should be very, very happy because after struggling in the first two games with black pieces, being completely out prepared and being down an hour on the clock in both, in this game he was never in danger whatsoever. He was definitely Ding chilling. So for Ding, he's got to be pretty happy. The match moves on tomorrow to game number 6. I would say that the flow of the match to me, as I look at it, is pretty straightforward here. For Ding, he's going to need to generate chances with the white piece in a game sooner or later. I don't really believe that he'll be able to get easy games like this with the black pieces as the match wears on, especially in the French defense, but we'll see what happens as we move forward. So on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from game number 5 of the 2024 World Chess Championship being held in Singapore between Ding Liren from China and Gukesh from India. If you are not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with a recap after game number 6 tomorrow. Hope you guys enjoyed it and have a great rest of your day. See you. Bye.